As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission, I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain, keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHH-LP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Good morning and afternoon and evening to everyone. I kind of start that way in terms of the Tom Ficklin Show because it's tomorrow in Australia, but also I think there's something pertinent when we talk about eternal time, because man's time is really, as referenced by tomorrow being in Australia, is really a social invention, maybe even a political invention. But sometimes I like to kind of just spend the shows thinking about things that are beyond, not necessarily beyond time and space, but some eternal issues that still seem to be manifesting themselves in our current realities. And so, for example, today, and hopefully not too many tomorrows, we're still dealing with the Middle East crisis, and I'm really blessed to have Reverend Dr. Frederick J. Streets with me. I was looking at Jerry's resume and his curriculum vitae, and we would spend another hour and a half on that. But I guess want to kind of, if I recited it, but I guess wanted to mention, with your being the adjunct associate professor of divinity and social work at the Yale Divinity School, and your bachelor's from Ottawa University in Kansas, and your MDiv, the Yale Divinity School. I won't mention what year, but it was a few years ago. But also, Reverend Streets has a Master's of Social Work and Doctor of Social Work from Yeshiva University, and he's also taught there. And also the DD from Ottawa again. Jerry's been on the battlefield for a number of years. He has a few scars, but he still has been able to survive and revive and resurrect himself. But I'll let him tell your story. But he's going to share with us something that he submitted to one of our local newspapers here in the state of Connecticut in terms of the October 6th situation. But way before that, many years before that, and Jerry's been involved with speaking to Black and Jewish groups. My mind goes, Jerry, to the various Martin Luther King Day events that you would speak at, and then you and Rabbi Brockman, and you and Benita, and Reverend Grubbs, that is, and just teaching and traveling to the Middle East, to the Holy Ground, also teaching and traveling to South Africa. So Jerry, good morning.
Good morning, Tom. Good to be with you and your audience, of course. Thank you.
So you had mentioned before we kind of started that you submitted a letter, kind of a letter to the editor, and I was so pleased to hear that, because so much, I think, is on our mind and soul and heart in terms of this travail, this tragedy, this possible even pandemic that's kind of erupting in the Middle East. And so share if you would, with folks some of the letter, and we'll kind of walk through some of your thoughts and feelings. Not that we'll be able to solve problems today, but I think we can solve, at least minimize, or at least help to orchestrate our angst, orchestrate our next steps, orchestrate how we should bring some harmony individually and collectively, not only to humanity, but particularly to the Middle East.
Well, thank you, Tom. The letter to the editor that I wrote has received both positive and negative responses, depending upon one's, of course, worldview and experiences. I opened the letter by saying that Hamas nor anyone else can justify the recent murder and torture of women, men, and children in Israel, and that rationalizing this inhumane behavior adds to the amoral action of those who perpetrated such violence upon innocent people, and that political arguments supporting murderous actions promote this kind of violence around the world and as a means justifying ends. And so there's certain situations where violence seems to be inevitable, but the deeper concern I have is when violence becomes preferable. to other ways by which conflicts can be resolved. Now we know that this problem in the Middle East between Israel and Gaza and Jewish people and Palestinians, some of which are also Jewish, is very complicated, a long history. It's about religion and culture and ethnicity. It's also about geopolitics, who will be in control of some strategic areas in the Middle East, as represented by Israel and Gaza and the Suez Canal, which is a major transport between the Middle East and Europe and the United States. So there's so many dimensions to this, and what we hear as average citizens, we hear it as primarily a conflict between Jews and non-Jews, or an ethnic kind of conflict, of which that is a part of it. Some are arguing that the only solution is a two-state solution, and that it remains to be seen, and a lot of details would have to go into that. When I hear about the idea of a two-state solution, I'm reminded a little bit of the history, our history here in the United States as African Americans and American history in general. That after the Civil War, there was this whole effort to have Confederate states, and although we talk of ourselves as we should as the United States under a universal federalist government, which I think is still a good model. We still have people in states that would, if they could succeed and become their own own state, their own entity, they would prefer it. At least that's their expressed goals. But it's I don't mean to trivialize this idea because of a two-state solution, and like those who wanted Confederate states over what we now call the United States. But we're all under the canopy of the same sky. We're all subject to the scarcity of resources, food and shelter and water. There is no American water and European water. There's no Palestinian water and Jewish water. We fight as if we have a certain kind of autonomy that totally ignores our mutual independence and our commonality as human beings. And all that gets mixed up and diminished by the political and sometimes, not sometimes, the political and religious ways in which people have decided to divide and see one another. I also said in this letter, I'm quoting now, all of us must engage in being honest and telling the truth about the reality, origins, and pernicious character of racism, anti-Semitism, misogyny, and homophobia gripping the psychic and soul of many people in our world. The isms are only brutal manifestations of our ignorance in choosing to believe in our inequality based on our differences as human beings. Now, in conversation with some people about this, the pushback on my perspective taken in this letter to the editor dated Friday, October 13th, 2023, is that it ignores the brutality, according to some people, of Israel against Gaza and Palestinians. That for over 70 years, there's been this building up of the West Bank and Israeli settlements, creating and reinforcing a very segregated world and treating people of Gaza and Palestinians as less than full human beings. And we as Black people know what that feeling is like when you live in a segregated world where things are separate and unequal. And that's certainly has been the social political case between Israel and Gaza, between Israelis and Palestinians. But how do you sit down at a table with someone whose stature of being enemy is primarily framed by perhaps the mutual feeling that both parties need not exist? How do you sit down? How do you sit down and talk with someone who promotes and has as a part of their ideology and campaign the fact that you shouldn't be on the face of the earth? Where do you start? Well, that narrative has to change, and there has to be a realization that both parties have an equal right to safety, security, and to life, and that they're mutually capable of enhancing those resources, or they're also capable of destroying it. And in the face of destroying it, they run the risk of promoting this kind of individualism around the world, as is the case now. We see so many outbreaks against Arabs and Israelis, against Jews and Christians, blacks and white people around the world. It has the same character, the same feature of power and defining other people as less than human, and therefore they are to be treated as such and even eliminated from the face of the earth.
The reason I'm pausing there because it's so profound in terms of lifting up this concept of humanity, and it's worth lifting it up. Jerry, take us back a little bit if you want, or if the spirit moves you. You were in Bosnia. You've been in South Africa, and I want people to understand that again, this historic we're part of this historical moment for better or for worse. Our children, our grandchildren, our memory bank, what we think and do regarding trying to bring this peace on earth, goodwill toward women, men, and children. We're entering that period now between now and Christmas and Hanukkah, et cetera. But what does your experience tell you as you're a licensed social worker? You've dealt with people that have been experiencing trauma throughout the world, in the United States and Bridgeport, as well as in Europe and Africa. And I was thinking about your teaching also at the Hartford, I think this was the Hartford Seminary at that point, just in terms of pastoral, the role of a pastor, in terms of pastoral counseling. What is your heart saying to you these days about our ability to replicate Rodney King? Can we all get along?
Well, one of my mentors, a name that you're familiar with, Howard Thurman, used to teach about the need for what he described as psychic surgery, that there has to be a reordering of the way in which we think about our mutuality and to create a space for common ground. Now, those are nice words and phrases, but the reality is that's exactly what needs to happen. And religious leaders of all stripes need to really, I would love to see a global campaign promoting the fact of our equality as human beings, and to tease it out in ways to keep it simple and straightforward, just to remind people and to hopefully teach the generation coming behind us of the fact that we are equal as human beings, creations of God or Allah, or whatever way you might refer to the Creator. Now, part of this problem is that you have people whose ideologies, be they religious or secular, that frames human beingness as categorical, as not equal, and they base it upon their religion, which I think is a distortion of the meaning of any religion. But that pushback about the inequality of people based upon race or ethnicity or culture or religion has to be strong and consistent, generation after generation. I've trained myself to think about and to speak about cultural and ethnic differences and not different races, because there's only one race. It's the human race. And so I've gotten to a point now that when I hear people say, something like all the different races got to learn how to get along, I immediately have a defensive. The hearing people talk about different races is too simple, and it negates the deeper thinking that requires us to remember that we're all of one race, which is a human race. So you mentioned my involvement, some of my involvements. Back in the late 70s, one of the hot topics that came up was Black-Jewish relationships. And I took a delegation of African-American people from the greater Bridgeport area, along with members of the Jewish community. We went to Israel twice. I understand, at least I think I do, I understand aspects of their perspective about their own history, particularly when you think about the Holocaust and the fact that 6 million or more of Jewish people were eliminated while the rest of the world kind of ignored it and pretended it didn't happen. That's a vivid, deeply ingrained reality and memory in the history of Jewish people, and I have a sense of understanding their desire for security and peace, and the threat they feel with the anti-Semitism in the region as well as around the world. So I can understand the way in which they created a new state, and that came out of a wars, and conflict, as will whatever happens now is coming out of this deep conflict, this war. But here's part of the tension. On one level, that fear and that reality of a group wanting you to no longer exist has propelled Israel to build the country that it has built so far, the military has built so far to protect itself, and to respond to being fired upon, killed, etc. There's a part of, I think, all of us that could understand that defensiveness, that reaction. Now, Hamas and people like Hamas or Hezbollah and other ethnic groups who continue to seem to me to promote this inferiority and therefore the need to eliminate Jewish people, had to be confronted by their myopia, their racism. Israel has to also confront how over these 70 years, for whatever the reasons, it has created such a segregated world between themselves and Gaza and Palestinians, and how that segregated world can and is often a petri dish for cultivating violence, because human beings eventually will rise up when they feel oppressed. So again, it doesn't justify what happened a month, 5 weeks ago. But the point is that I've said it also in this note, is that I have friends in Israel, and as an African American, I know that what is happening there is not an isolated event. The hatred of Israelis demonstrated by Hamas in Israel is what other terrorist groups are expressing throughout the world. An environment where lies and stereotypes about people are advanced and masquerade as truths encourages hate groups. This gives energy to animosity and hatred. Now, a response to that kind of perspective is that when I say the hatred of Israelis demonstrated by Hamas, there'll be people who will say, but there's also been hatred demonstrated by Israelis for Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as black and white.
Mm-hmm.
It's both communities have perpetrated for different reasons, some of which might be thought of as understandable but not preferable, perpetrated violence on one another. And so there's got to be a larger vision that no matter what the political and economic compromises that's going to come out of this, there's still the long range challenge of dealing with the pain of the trauma, because people who have lost their loved ones, who've lost limbs, but particularly lost loved ones on both sides, who survived this, have the potential to be the next generation of mutual haters.
Say that again, Jerry.
Well, people on both sides,
Mm-hmm.
Israelis and Palestinians, who have lost so tremendously, and they've experienced the losses and the trauma of the last 5 weeks. Until their pain is addressed in a lot of different ways and levels, it becomes a potential environment for future hatred between the two groups.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be an intervention. I'm not trying to make this sound, it sounds romantic or idealistic, but in some ways, when Bishop Tutu, a beloved friend of both of us, of ours, embodied the whole approach to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, regardless of how one evaluates its success or failure, it became the intervention between a potential revenge approach on the Black South African side and the fear approach of being defensive and assuming they're going to be annihilated on the white South African side. And the Truth and Reconciliation created a space where it lowered that temperature of fear and revenge, and set the stage for certain levels of healing. And that's got to happen going forward with the situation in Israel and Gaza, because if it's not, listen, you think about children who saw their parents killed in front of them, or maimed or raped or whatever, and the child survives it, and even maybe their relatives. Those are wounds that's suffering that's going to be there for forever, and that has to be addressed in order for any geopolitical, economic solution to take hold, because the tenderness of the pain going forward can be so easily ignited, that it can disrupt any future political agreements, and that has to be the broader agenda. That's really dealing with this pain has to be a broader agenda that's upfront and done on a daily basis.
Say some more about that in terms of your MSW hat and your doctor of social worker hat, in terms of these scars, because I think people, they cognitively they hear that and say, oh, that's true, and they watch movies and TVs where you see that work manifesting itself as people. We've seen a lot of movies and TV shows about this. But what in terms of your clinical training and your clinical pastoral training, let's nail that down a little bit more and emphasize that more in terms of what you see, just the tender,
the language is some of the words are easy to express. Going back again, I've been thinking a lot about Howard Thurman in light of what's been happening, along with my own understanding, my own history as a African American, but he so eloquently talked about decades ago in the book Jesus and the Disinherited, how the oppressed and the oppressor occupy a system that oppresses both of them, even though there's a power unequal power distribution. But the situation of segregation and the ideology of racism reinforces fear, deception, and hatred. Mm. And the combination of being afraid of those whom are or perceived as enemies, the internalization of the attitude of being a victim and or being an oppressor, both identities as false, but they've been internalized, that the oppressor thinks of themselves as superior, and the oppressed have to fight against internalizing the message of their inferiority. And the combination of fear and deception is a formula for hatred. So at some point you start hating being in a situation that is constantly telling you you're nobody, and being in a situation where you're being oppressed systemically on all different levels. And that hatred then, and that deception and that fear creates the environment for ongoing conflict, and eventually boils over into the kind of conflict we see not only in the Middle East, but even tribal conflicts in Black African countries, where tribal groups are killing and destroying one another. So that's why you see it's not always about race as we narrowly understand it as color, because these are people of the same color fighting each other. It's about a deeper feeling of superiority and inferiority. And so unless those fears, deceptions, and hatreds are challenged and named and labeled and described how they're operating in the world, you can't get to the fourth dimension of what Thurman talked about. And he used the word love, but not in some kind of Valentine's Day sentimentality. He's talking about a love that results from both the oppressed and the oppressor coming to an understanding of their equality and their need to affirm each other's humanity, as well as eventually embracing the ecology of the world as far as an environmental standpoint, the love of self and neighbor and of the world we live in. So how that gets operationalized in so many ways that it would have to be operationalized, but unless there's an agenda for doing it, it will never get off the ground. It would always be the piece of it would always be like a match, just a few feet away from a stick of dynamite. Until those things are addressed, the chances of explosion is there.
And that's so profound what you mentioned, Jerry. And it seems to me that in terms of the volatility, not only in that particular part of the world, but the volatility worldwide, as you alluded to, it seems to me, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the last 2 or 3 days, the three students that were visiting their friend in Vermont, and not to use the word trigger as a metaphor, but their existence did trigger someone else's actions toward them. And
they were wearing the scarf that some people see as symbolic of being a Palestinian.
Right. So talk a little bit about those triggers, because it seems to me that people are, and we hear this word microaggression, et cetera, but talk about triggers that I think people are being triggered as we speak, as they listen to this, and how do we make sure that trigger does not manifest in terms of people taking up a weapon, but maybe triggering their desire to do yoga or pray.
One thing to keep in mind, that a trigger is that which ignites something that's already there. So it's not the trigger, that person who shot those 3 college students in Vermont maybe was aware or maybe not of his, and I think it was a man, of his bias towards what he perceived as the enemy. And again, this is the internalization of oppression. Now, the 3 men got shot. The man had a gun. There was a power imbalance of power there, but the guy who did the shooting operated out of an internalized view of himself being better than, more human than the 3 people he shot. They became objects, just like the murder and raping and lynching of our people, the killing of the 4 little girls in the Birmingham church. And we can cite so many other instances. All of that is behavior of people who have internalized a deceived view of themselves and of the world and other people. And that has to be addressed not only from a psychological, spiritual standpoint, but also, systems of racism has to have systems of anti-racism. So that's why you have laws and penalties for certain behaviors. So it's just not a matter of everybody being in pastoral counseling. That's not going to that's not going to be enough. It'll be enough for some people, but we all need to live in a social structure where the system itself is not perpetuating hatred, fear, and deception.
And Jerry, just on just 1 second.
Yeah.
Just on that note, share with us about because you're not just, although ministers might be accused of just talking the talk and not doing the walk. You've been talking the talk, but also doing the walk consistently, and the evidence is there. You have a bunch of receipts, as I'm sure your wife would say. But share with folks where even in this, if this might not be the winter of your life, but hopefully you and I will encounter a few more winters. But in terms of the social worker responsibilities at the Divinity School for grooming, teaching, sharing, and impacting people that want to get involved with the career of social work and the possible solutions that might manifest by participating in your program.
Well, at the Divinity School, we're preparing men and women for a life of service, either through the institutions of religion, churches, faith-based organizations, or a life of service outside of a religious framework, such as in government, philanthropy, that kind of thing. But at the core, for me, at the core of that education is self-awareness, helping people to cultivate and develop how they can continue to grow and become aware of their own values and biases, and how to then intentionally live a life that fosters the kind of humanitarian, the kind of view of humanity that fosters this kind of equality in the spheres where they work. And for those students who are doing the joint degree in divinity and social work, as I have, it's a wonderful combination, because social work provides knowledge and skills about working with individuals or couples or families or groups or large communities or even nation states around how to operationalize a value based programs and approaches that indeed affirms the humanity and dignity of all people. And that's hard work. It's everyday work, and it's understanding your context, how to use the resources of the context you're working in. But all of that is fundamental to the person knowing themselves and how they will choose to live their life as a testament to a certain set of values. And that's broadly the work that I do with students and with myself.
When you're not on the golf course, right?
Well, the golf course has a way of reminding you of the importance of humility.
But let's spend another 10 minutes if we could, if you have time.
Yeah.
Just on the if I mention the word Fulbright, I want you to kind of share people about that, because although that particular senator was from the South, in spite of what you might think about Southern senators, the Fulbright opportunity, the Fulbright fellowship, scholarship, to be a Fulbright fellow, that was really, I think, seminal and instrumental for us to kind of understand that we're in a global society. So I guess you had a chance to kind of take advantage of that governmental policy.
I was fortunate to be what they call a senior Fulbright scholar, and I went to University of Pretoria in South Africa. I taught at the school of what's called practical theology. These similar divinity school, similar to the divinity school here at Yale, where people are learning how to lead as religious leaders in churches or outside of them, as well as in the School of Social Work at the University of Pretoria. And my major thrust then was going there to learn how the religious community was responding to the needs of people suffering with HIV and AIDS.
Mm.
This was 2008. And I was there in 2008, 2010, and 2012. All centered around learning from Black South Africans, white South Africans who were involved in some kind of ministry, or we would call it ministry or program, trying to meet the needs of people suffering with HIV and AIDS. So it was a combination of pastoral care. How do you sit with people who are suffering? How do you give them support? But also concrete needs such as food and clothing and housing and medications at the time, because there was such an unequal availability of resources depending upon a person's social class, social, political, and cultural class. So, like it is here in other places in the world, some people have more access to those resources than others. That was certainly true at the time in South Africa. So that was a specific focus, that the reason why I went. And of course, being there for 6 months, you travel around the country, you get to learn more history about the country, about its diverse peoples. You talk about a diverse place. I mean, South Africa is one of the most diverse places on the face of the earth. And geographically, the entire United States could fit in the top half of South Africa geographically. It's such a huge place. But it has a different history and a different culture, and the long history of tribal history amongst the different Black South African tribal communities is fascinating. We were warmly received, but I must say that they understood or saw us as Black Americans and not necessarily Black Africans returning to connect with their cousins. Too much has gone under the dam, water under the dam for that kind of affinity. But it was a life-changing experience, and as to this day, I still stay in touch with people that I worked with there.
Tremendous.
But I really miss. Hope to get back one more time.
Good.
Before it's all over.
Good. And when you referenced HIV or COVID, I mean, there's two clear examples where bomb diseases do not really respect borders, and we're in a global society. And my concern is, from a psychological standpoint, is that this Middle East situation is really infecting our consciousness in such a negative, in such a challenging way. We know about the social determinants of I'd say the social, political, economic, theological, and even existential determinants of health. Our body politic, of my standpoint, is really being infected at the moment, and whether we can have an antidote or whether it'll become a pandemic is really a just a a cognitive concern. I wondered if you had any thoughts about that. You referenced how the religious community, the public servant community can kind of rise up and do a I don't know, Jonathan Edwards revival kind of things, but there seems to be a need for us to really kind of grips with this long history of Cain and Abel and other issues that have been, and Abraham is perceived to be kind of a seminal figure for many religions. So I just wonder if you had any thoughts about our body mind state, as we, regardless of what age you are or wherever you might live on the planet. I'm concerned about us being infected, negatively infected and
Right.
long-term infected, and that there might
Well,
not be an antidote.
as I mentioned earlier about the letter to the editor, and I said we must all engage in being honest and telling the truth about the reality,
Hmm.
the origins and pernicious character, racism, anti-Semitism, misogyny, and homophobia,
Hmm.
etc., ripping the psychic and soul. That to me means that the short answer is we have to promote, and you see this all over now in the internet and whatnot. We have to promote self-care,
Hmm.
and self-care includes that brutal honesty about our biases, prejudices, hatreds, our fears,
Hmm.
and our deceptions. But it's self-care not just for the purpose of my emotional, physical, spiritual, and emotional health. It's self-care in service to humanity,
Hmm.
because yeah, okay, I might be able to isolate in certain ways and take care of myself, but I don't live in a world alone.
Hmm.
What somebody does in China or Russia can affect my quality of life overnight.
Hmm.
Um, so we have to think of our global connectedness while we also take individual responsibility for our own well-being. And so that means hopefully for some people having somebody to talk to, whether it's on a professional level or pastoral level or deep friendship, being able to really talk about what we're feeling and experiencing. That means taking better care of our health and diet and exercise. It means being able to discipline ourselves in such a way that we become aware of how we are in a toxic relationship or a toxic environment, and what we need to do to not only protect ourselves, but to eliminate any kind of toxicity. And I said to people during the George Floyd uprising and subsequent murders of Black people, men and women and children, that we have to even be careful how much we take in those stories. Not that we should ignore and not be aware, but you can't listen to those kind of stories in news 24/7.
Hmm.
They're concrete things people have to do to take care of themselves. Because as you know, and we all say to ourselves, if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be any good for anybody else. So, but also part of self-care and service to humanity, in my view, self-care also helps you to listen critically and deeply, to find those ways of responding that comes out of a deep place of your own understanding and reflection, and not always being emotively reactive. So to be involved and be citizens in the world, even in your local community, requires really paying attention to what needs to be called out, addressed, challenged, but all from that deeper place of one's own inner strength.
Jerry, as we conclude, my typical, I shouldn't say typical, but I think you've deciphered the method to my madness here. I want you to kind of cite either a biblical story or a passage that kind of still resonates with you, or that you think people need to consider reminding themselves, regardless of their religious or secular perspective.
Sure.
Well,
for those of your audience who are familiar with the creation story in Genesis, It's a commonly held story, or some people may say it's a myth. It's a narrative of longstanding value in the lives of a lot of people, and it continues to capture our imagination. There's a story about when the first couple was created by the creator. There was a point where the creator was looking for them and couldn't find them, and finally there was a response. Yeah, we heard you looking for us, but we didn't respond, said the first couple, normally referred to as Adam and Eve. We didn't respond because we were naked. And the creator responds with a question that is profoundly political, social, economic, theological, spiritual, psychological. The creator responds with, who told you were naked?
Mm. Mm.
So what's the point? What is the reference point for your identity?
Mm.
You mean to tell me that, quote, as a symbol, you took your identity from from a thing that was called a serpent?
Mm. Mm.
The serpent told you who you were, i.e. naked. So we have to really pay attention to the stories we've told ourselves and what is our reference point for our identity.
Mm.
And if those reference points are dimensions that causes us to feel less than human, less than whole, less than equal to anyone else, then that needs to be challenged. And so I'm going back to the beginning of our conversation. The whole idea of people being inferior and superior, and with the power imbalance of people using their power to destroy other people because they don't see them as equal, is the fundamental psychological and spiritual and political challenge we're faced as a world.
Let's conclude on that until we do it again.
Okay, man. I appreciate it, and thank you for all that you're doing.
Well, I appreciate you, and let's keep hope alive, right? As one of our good friends would say.
Oh yeah.
Thank you so much, man. Be well.
Okay, thank you.
Be well.
As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains, haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHH LP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.